This LOS is explain the multiplication, addition, and total probability rules. So the LOS is explain the multiplication, addition, and total probability rules. So the multiplication rule, we use that for joint probability. The joint probability of A and B equals the probability of A given B times the probability of B. We use the addition rule for the probability of A or B occurring. So the probability of A or B equals the probability of A plus the probability of B minus the probability of A or B, both happening. So we don't count this overlapping area if we want A or B occurring, okay? So it's the probability of A plus the probability of B minus the probability of AB. So given events A and B, the probability that A or B occurs, or both occurs, is equal to the probability of A occurs plus the probability of B occurs minus the probability that both A and B occurs. So let's work our way through a joint probability. An example using conditional probability. So there's a probability that interest rates will increase. That's 20%. So there's a probability that there'll be a recession given a rate increase. Okay? So the probability of a recession and an increase in rates equals the probability of the recession given a net rate increase times the probability of that there'll be an interest rate increase. So it's 0.8 times 0.2, that's 16%. Okay? So use the additional rule for probability of A or B occurring. So again, the probability of A or B equals the probability of A plus the probability of B minus the joint probability of A and B. So the probability of an interest rate increase or a recession is 20% plus 80% minus 16% equals 84%. For mutually exclusive events, the joint probability of AB equals 0. So the probability of A or B equals the probability of A plus the probability of B. Now, if you found that a little bit confusing, don't worry, because this slide I'm going to give you some tips on how to better answer these type of questions. So these questions become a classic CFA case of given three variables, solve for the fourth. You just have to understand some of the terms. So the steps is, number one, read the question. Number two, write the formula. And then make X the unknown, and then solve. So the key in these type of questions is to know that the probability of A or B equals the probability of A plus the probability of B minus the probability of AB. So here's some tips of how a question would be worded and how you figure out what the variables are. So the probability of A or B, the probability that A and or B occurs, okay? The example is if 95% of the stocks have paid a dividend and or announced a stock split. You see that? A or B, and or. So when you see that, the probability, if 95% of the stocks have paid a dividend and or announced a stock split, that's the probability of A or B. That's your 95% there. That variable has been given to you. The PA, that's easy. That's the probability of A, and that's the probability of B. The PAB is the way that is phrased in a question is the joint probability. The joint probability of A and B both occurring. So the example is the joint, when you see the word, the joint probability of a stock paying a dividend and announcing a stock split, okay? When you see the joint probability, then the word joint, then you know you're filling in for this variable here. So again, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 variables. The question is always going to give you 3 variables. Given the 3, solve for X. They become very easy. So don't be too confused. Look at some of the practice problems using these steps, and you'll find that these types of questions become a lot easier. The multiplication rule is used for independent probabilities. So two events A and B are independent if and only if the probability of A or B equals the probability of A, or equivalently, the probability of B to A equals the probability of B. When two events are independent, the joint probability of A and B equals the product of the individual probabilities of A and B. So we're going to use the multiplication rule, okay? Therefore, if we're interested in two independent events occurring with probabilities of 0.75 and 0.5, the probability that both will occur is just 0.75 times 0.5, so it's 0.375, 37.5% probability, okay? The multiplication rule for independent events generalizes to more than two events. For example, if A, B, and C are independent events, then the probability of A, B, and C all happening is the probability of A times the probability of B times the probability of C.